Hi, my name's Lynn White, and I'm with Butler Soil and Water Conservation District. And today we're going to talk about pollination syndromes. And this is part of the Pollinator series that we've been conducting over this past year. That's a partnership between my office, the Ohio State Extension of Butler County with JT Benitez, and also with Troy and Kathy Schwabel from the Hamilton Conservation Corp. And they take care of the Riverside Natural Area down along the river in Hamilton. So we've been doing this 4-part series, and each part has got multiple speakers. So this is just one section of one of those. We're going to try and record more of the videos and make them available for you. But let me transfer over to sharing my screen and we can get started. All right, so pollination syndromes. Pollination syndromes are when the plants have evolved traits to help them with pollination, whether that pollination is abiotic through like wind and water or biotic through living things like the birds, bees, and the flies. So these traits can be things like the flower shape, the flower size, color, the kind of odor it produces, the reward it provides, and even the timing the flowers are actually open and active. So the way that they actually manage to get the pollinators involved is that most flowering plants, when they're pollinated, is through mutualism, and that's where both the plant and the animal receive benefits. So the plant gets the pollen transferred and the animal gets a reward. Now there's 3 different kinds of rewards that plants can produce. They've got the pollen, which is high in proteins and lipids and so on. You've got the sugary nectar. But some animals, especially in the male solitary bees, they use oils that can be produced by the plant to help them attract females. So there's different rewards available to the animals for approaching these flowers and helping to spread the pollen. The flower themselves obviously get their pollen dispersed. And when the pollen is dispersed, if it's by a pollinator that likes to visit the same type of flower over and over again, then that animal doesn't have to relearn how to actually get down to its reward. And the plant will receive higher rates of pollination through that floral consistency. So there's benefits to the plants and there's benefits to the animals when they're kind of working together through that mutualism. So when we look at the kind of plants that you want in your garden, if you're going to attract pollinators, be diverse. Different animals have got different needs. You've got things like the hummingbird there with the long beak. They like the long tubes in their flowers. Butterflies like to have flat open flowers where they've got a landing pad. So there's different needs from those different animals. So the more diverse you are in your plantings, the more variety, the more diversity of pollinators that you should see visiting your yard. So there's different kinds of specialization by the pollinators. You've got the monos where they only like to visit one particular type of plant, all the way through the polylacti where there's multiple different kinds of species visited. The plants themselves benefit more from the monolacti. I mentioned that a minute ago. When the bees or the butterflies visit one particular type, then they're less likely to carry the wrong types of pollen towards the flowers. So when it comes to the specialization, what types of flowers do the different pollinators prefer? I've got bats on that list, but here in Ohio, we don't have fruit bats. So our bats here are not helping with pollination. They do another awesome job for us. They help to keep the mosquito and other insect count low because that's what they feast on. So although bats is on this list, it's because I borrowed this list from elsewhere. In Ohio, we can look at our bees, beetles, birds, butterflies, and moths. So you can look at color. If you're going to be attracting bees, as you can see there, you want like bright white, yellow, or blue. And it also mentions UV there, ultraviolet. Bees can see ultraviolet light, which we cannot. And so some of the plants that they're going to visit, if you were to put them under a UV light, you would see that they've got raceways, they've got tracks or lines on them that can encourage the bee to get right down in there where they're going to find the pollen. Whereas if you were a bird, then quite often you're going to be looking for scarlet and orange or white. Butterflies like bright colored flowers. Moths are looking for more pale and dull colors. When it comes to odor, they've got very specific requirements there as well. So I'm actually going to go into some of these in a little bit more detail in a second. But this is kind of a nice chart that I'll make available on our website where you can access it. So you can see all the information in more detail. This is just another chart produced by someone else telling you when you're going to be seeing these animals active and the colors and the smells and so on. So there's lots of these charts out there that can give you a hint towards what to plant in your yard. So the ways that the plants can actually attract these pollinators is they can provide visual cues. So in the first picture there, you can see the darker red area is kind of that nectar guide, bringing the bees into the center of the flower. I mentioned earlier about bees being able to see ultraviolet light, and you can see there with, I think that's a dandelion. So we've got it in the regular light that we can see on the left, but under ultraviolet light, it's got that nectar guide in the middle, that dark red in the center of the flower, drawing the bees closer. You can have bullseye patterns, and you can also have reverse bullseye. So again, it's all things that are visual cues to bring the pollinator right into the center of that flower. And then you get the stinky cues, the smelly cues. Butterflies and birds, they're visual. They're not going to be all that concerned about the different smelling flowers. But if you want to attract bees, you want sweet or spicy smelling plants. Moths and bats are very olfactory, and they don't care so much about the looks. Moths, think about moths. A lot of the moths are out there at nighttime. And so visual cues are not going to be that great for something that's flying around at night. And so they're going to be attracted to the scent of the flower. Shape. Different animals have different needs when it comes to shapes. It's not just, hey, it looks good to them, but whether or not it's offering a landing pad. So you can see the monarch there on the bottom. It's got that nice flat open flower where it's able to land. So shape, it can be to do with landing, or it can be to do with how they feed. So things like the moths with the really long tongues, or the hummingbirds with really long beaks will use that long nectar tube. And then the bottom picture there on the right, you can see how the flowers there are actually mimicking females of, I think it's a type of beetle. So the shape will be important for different creatures. Okay, so when you're looking at bees and how to attract bees and the types of plants that they are going to appreciate, you've got to remember bees are pretty smart little creatures. And although we haven't quite figured out quite how bumblebees fly yet, they are really agile. So bees are very visual. They've got a good sense of smell, and they're going to be active in the day. So bee-pollinated flowers are going to be very colorful, except not red, because that doesn't do it for them. They'll have a landing platform, so somewhere that's open where they can actually land. They might crawl right down into the flower after they've landed, but they need that good landing area. They don't have to have all that strong a fragrance. And then, of course, again, I mentioned the nectar guides before. So this is what you're looking for if you're going to be attracting bees. Now, if you're going to attract beetles, those guys, they're kind of clumsy. They don't have great vision, and they can be active during the day. Some are active at night, but most of the flower visiting ones are going to be active during the day. So you're going to want large areas on them for those beetles to be crawling around on. If you've got little delicate petals, then the beetles are going to just fall off. To attract them, you want fruity or spicy smelling, because remember, they don't have good eyesight. And so they're going to be using their sense of smell. So fruity or spicy smells. To attract birds, we usually think of our hummingbirds here. So when you think about birds as being the pollinators, you always see those red feeders for our hummingbirds. So they do see that color really well. And our hummingbirds are extremely agile with those long beaks. So you'll want to have flowers kind of in these shapes with that long floral tube. And the reason for the long floral tube is because there's less competition. You're not going to have the bees getting in there for them to already have taken the nectar away. And so it's going to be available for these birds with their long beaks. Now, one thing, if you put out hummingbird feeders in your yard, you can go out and buy pre-made kind of syrups for them. You can very easily make your own using sugar and water. If you make your own, don't add food coloring to it. The feeder itself is colored red. There's no point putting those extra additives there that may in turn hurt the bird. Whether you make your own or you're buying pre-bought nectar for the hummingbirds, clean your feeder every day or every other day if it's getting to cooler weather. And that's because of bacteria that can make them really sick. And also that sugar water can ferment, and then you're going to end up with little drunk hummingbirds flying around. So if you have feeders out, make sure you're cleaning them all the time, and just be careful about what you're putting in them. So butterflies, these guys have got great sense of vision. So they like different colors of flowers, and they have like the long coiled tongue, which they can use for getting into the small spaces, but they have to be able to land. They're not hummingbirds. They're not going to hover around. They need that place to land on. So there's an example down there in the bottom. The plumbago flowers are nice and flat landing areas for them to land on. So your butterflies are the blue, yellow, and orange colored flowers. Your moths, they can't see as well as butterflies, but they do have a great sense of smell. And look at how amazingly long their coiled tongue is. So I'm not sure what kind of moth that is, but it just blows me away seeing how long their tongues actually are. So the moths being active at night, you want flowers that are open at night, and you want them to have a fragrance so that it will attract them. So most moths are going to want to land, but some, like the hawk moths, can actually hover. Unlike the butterflies where they all need to land. So you can see the length of the nectar spurs down there on the columbine. Flies, now most of us don't really want to attract a whole bunch of flies to our yard, but flies can be good pollinators for specific plants. And that's the ones that stink, the ones that we're not really going to be planting around our yard. Here's like the example of the corpse flower. And it gets its name because, hey, it smells like rotten meat. And not only does it smell like it, it's that dark red purple color that kind of mimics rotten meat as well. So this is one where there is no mutualism because the plant doesn't actually offer a reward. It's just fooling the flies to come in there and help pollinate it. So yeah, Miami University does have a corpse flower. But it's not something that you're going to have kicking around in your yard. We don't quite have the right growing seasons in our yard for this tropical plant. The bats I mentioned before, those things are mainly tropical. Our ones around here, they're eating the mosquitoes and the other bugs that they're finding flying around. So this is just kind of more there for your basic information, just in case you move somewhere nice and tropical in future. But they do have a great sense of smell. And we all know that bats can't see very well. You hear about blind as a bat and stuff. So they're not blind, but because they're flying around at night, they do use that echolocation to help them find their way around. So if you move somewhere tropical, you want flowers that are open at night that produce lots and lots of pollen and nectar as a reward, that have a sweet odor. And because of the bats are coming flying up from below, it can be pendulent flowers like the one that you see there, or pendant flowers, sorry. So for you to attract a diverse group of pollinators, have a diverse group of plants. Have flowers that are available throughout the seasons. Don't just think about the reward of the pollen or the nectar or the oils. The pollinators also need somewhere to raise their young. So you can have all these flower resources for food, but if you don't have nest sites anywhere nearby where they can lay their eggs, then you're not going to see those pollinators no matter how much food that you're providing. Also remember to provide water. And I've got another video that shows how to make a butterfly puddler, which is a really simple thing for you to do. When you're thinking about the food, be bountiful. Make sure you've not just got one of this plant and one of another plant, because if you have a pollinator that is very plant specific and it manages to grow from an egg in your yard and it's only one plant there to feed it, then not only is that plant not going to have cross-pollination from other plants, but that pollinator is going to run out of food really, really quickly. So if you plant in clumps, you always hear about landscape planning, about planting clumps of like 3 and 5 and 7 and odd numbers and stuff. But when it comes to the pollinators, clumps with multiple plants, not only because of providing that food, but also when the caterpillars are there, if they are eating that plant and you only have like one milkweed plant, it's very easy for the birds to spot that the leaves are getting munched on that plant. Whereas if you have the clumping of them, it's harder for the birds to spot the caterpillars in there gnawing away on those leaves. So plant in quantities. Hopefully you have the space for that. Also make sure you go native. Kathy, when she's spoken in some of the sessions that she has, including a recent one that she did on trees for different pollinators, we've really pushed the fact that the plants have evolved, or the pollinators have evolved here locally with native plants. So if you're bringing in plants from everywhere else, they might not have the right smell, the right color, the right shape, the right nectar guides and so on that the local pollinators are looking for. So if you have any questions, you can contact me. My office, again, is Butler Soil and Water Conservation District, and our website is butlerswcd.org. And I'm Lynn White. Thank you very much for joining me.